Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving deep into the ongoing trial of Sean Diddy Combs. It's definitely a case that's getting a lot of attention.
It really is. And we're basing our discussion today on some recent YouTube coverage, specifically from Scandal and the Law and Crime Network.
Right, so we're getting, real-time reporting and some pretty solid legal analysis straight from people watching the courtroom stuff.
Exactly. Gives us a good window into what's happening.
And our mission today, really, is to pull out the most, significant and, frankly, fascinating details from the testimonies we're hearing about.
Yeah, trying to make sense of these complex allegations, the legal arguments.
Without getting totally bogged down.
Yeah.
We want to give you a clear picture. So, okay, let's get into it. Some of these claims are just, wow, extraordinary.
Yeah, extraordinary is one word for it. What's really striking looking at these transcripts is just the sheer number of people coming forward, with really disturbing stories about Combs and Cassie Ventura. And it feels like the prosecution isn't just hitting individual points.
No, it seems bigger.
Exactly. They seem to be building a case for a broader pattern, maybe even suggesting some kind of criminal enterprise.
Okay, so let's start with one of the key testimonies. Sheree Hayes, also known as the Punisher. He was an exotic dancer, a former sex worker.
Right. And his testimony was...
Well, it was something else.
He testified he was hired by both Diddy and Cassie, maybe a dozen times. Something like that.
Yeah, around a dozen times. And for this really specific, very unusual purpose.
Which was, he was supposed to have sex with Cassie while Diddy just watched naked.
Just watched. Nate, when you hear that, it immediately makes you question the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
Totally. And that first meeting he described at the Trump Hotel.
He said he thought it was going to be like a party or something social.
But no, it was just Cassie in a bathrobe and a wig.
Yeah. And then the detail about them both putting on baby oil. Hayes called it creating a sexy scene for Diddy. It just highlights how orchestrated, how, weird these alleged meetups were. It really does. What does that kind of setup, suggest to you about the power Diddy might have had in those moments?
Well, it screams imbalance, right, of
Yeah.
a very specific kind of control being asserted.
Yeah. Hayes even said that during these times, and he specified oral and penetrative sex with Cassie, he was told point blank, don't look at Diddy, don't talk to Diddy.
Wow.
And according to Hayes, Diddy wasn't just passively watching. He was giving, subtle directions.
Directions? About what?
To Cassie, apparently. About, angles, the lighting, their positions, even the specific sex acts. It's such a detailed and honestly bizarre picture.
That alleged level of direction, that control, that's absolutely central for the prosecution, I think.
Right, because it pushes back hard against the idea that Cassie was just, a willing participant.
Exactly. And the other details Hayes gave about the room itself, dim lighting, electronic candles, furniture covered in sheets, bowls of baby oil everywhere.
It just adds to this really unsettling vibe.
It does. And then his claim that Diddy was masturbating while watching. That's a particularly disturbing element.
Definitely.
Yeah.
He also mentioned getting paid $800 for that first time. Hearing all these specifics.
Huh.
It's hard not to think about the psychological side of it for everyone involved.
Absolutely. Then, moving on, we heard from Carrie Morgan. She used to be Cassie's best friend.
Right. And her testimony shifted focus more towards alleged physical violence. She said she saw Diddy being violent towards Cassie multiple times.
Pushing, hitting. She gave specific examples.
Which is important, right? Because it could back up Cassie's own claims of abuse.
Very important. That incident she described in Jamaica, hearing screaming, then seeing Diddy allegedly dragging Cassie by her hair.
Yeah, that's a really vivid, awful image.
And it lines up potentially with other things, like her saying Cassie came back with a black eye after that 2016 hotel incident. We've all seen parts of that surveillance video.
Right, so that kind of consistency from different people, different sources, that can be powerful for a jury.
No doubt. And Morgan didn't just talk about Cassie.
No, she claimed Diddy assaulted her too, at Cassie's apartment.
What did she allege happened?
Choking her, hitting her with a wooden coat hanger. Said she had visible injuries, finger marks on her neck, even a concussion. She mentioned vomiting, getting a medical diagnosis.
Okay, so that suggests the alleged aggression wasn't just limited to his relationship with Cassie.
Exactly. Which could be huge.
That's a crucial point. If they can prove an assault on Morgan, it points to that broader pattern you mentioned, which could feed into the racketeering charge.
And there was that weird part about Diddy offering her money. $30,000.
Right. And Cassie's alleged reaction to that offer,
So
telling Morgan she was milking it or over-exaggerating.
that just adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it? About the relationships, the pressure maybe.
Definitely. And Morgan signing an NDA, apparently without really reading it carefully,
Yeah.
it all paints a picture. And the fact she says she has zero contact now with either Cassie or Diddy, that speaks volumes too.
Then we also heard from Don Richard from Danity Kane.
Her testimony was also about witnessing violence.
She said she saw Diddy punch Cassie in the face, just point blank, during an argument in a hallway.
But the defense pushed back hard on her credibility.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Tried to find inconsistencies in her story over time. Standard defense tactic, obviously.
Sure. But even if they poke holes in some details, the core allegation, witnessing a punch, can still land heavily with the jury.
And similar story with Mila Morales, the makeup artist.
Right, the incident around the 2010 Grammys weekend.
She described Diddy storming in, angry, demanding to know where Cassie was.
And then hearing screaming and yelling from the room Cassie was in.
Yeah. And afterwards, Morales said she saw Cassie with a swollen eye, a busted lip, knots on her head. Again, very specific visual descriptions.
These accounts are starting to pile up.
They really are. And they're not just coming from friends or colleagues. We also heard from George Kaplan, a former employee of Diddy's.
And he was granted immunity to testify, which is significant.
Very. He said part of his job was literally cleaning up hotel rooms after what he called Diddy's freak-offs.
Okay, let's clarify that term freak-offs in this context. The reporting suggests these were like parties involving sex, often with multiple people, allegedly set up by Diddy.
That seems to be the implication, yeah.
Yeah.
Kaplan also talked about how important it was to protect Diddy's public image.
Worried about embarrassing videos or pictures getting out, he mentioned some outlet called Hot.
Yeah, worried about them selling stuff. He even talked about handling huge amounts of cash for Diddy,
Like how much?
like $50,000 on a private jet once, picking up $10,000 from Western Union, stuff like that. What does that tell you, the cleaning up, the cash handling?
Well, Kaplan's testimony gives us a peek behind the curtain into that alleged inner circle
Mm-hmm.
and the efforts supposedly made to keep things quiet, cleaning up after freak-offs, worrying about leaks. It really supports the idea of trying to maintain secrecy.
He also talked about Diddy's relationships, right? Kim Porter, Cassie, Gina Wynn.
Yeah, he noted Kim was maybe treated differently, made Diddy happy. It adds a comparative angle.
And he claimed he saw abuse, too. Against Cassie, noticed bruises on her face after a flight. And against Gina Wynn, said Diddy threw apples at her.
Threw apples.
Yeah. And when asked why he didn't step in,
Fear for his career, I imagine.
that's what he said, fear for his career. He eventually quit, said it was because his father got sick, but also because he just didn't want to be involved in, his words, covering things up anymore.
Coming from someone allegedly that close with immunity, that could be really powerful testimony for the jury.
Absolutely. His reasons for not intervening earlier, job security, that's sadly relatable maybe for some jurors.
Yeah. Okay, then there was Kid Cudi.
Right. Who dated Cassie back in 2011.
And he testified things got weird after Diddy found out about them.
Yeah, he described getting a call from someone in Diddy's camp, then thinking Diddy himself was actually at his house.
But when he got back, no one was there.
No one there. But his security cameras had been moved, gifts were opened, his dog was locked in the bathroom, just strange stuff.
And then the really alarming part?
The Porsche. Weeks later, his Porsche was set on fire. They showed pictures of the burned car to the jury.
Wow. What kind of impact does that have, even if there's no direct proof linking Diddy to the fire?
Well, it introduces this potential theme of intimidation, maybe retaliation.
The timing is certainly suspicious, right after Diddy supposedly found out about him and Cassie.
Exactly. And the defense hammered him on the lack of direct evidence. No video, no DNA connecting Diddy to the arson.
Of course.
But the suggestion is planted. Especially since Cudi testified he wasn't even there when it happened. He was with Cassie and her family in Connecticut.
Okay. And Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, backed that up.
She did. Confirmed Cassie and Cudi were in Connecticut in December 2011. But her testimony got even more disturbing.
How so?
She read an email Cassie had apparently sent her, detailing alleged threats from Diddy.
What kind of threats?
Threats to release explicit sex tapes, around Christmas Day specifically, and soon after.
Oh my God.
And threats of physical harm against both Cassie and Cudi. Though the email apparently said Diddy wouldn't do it himself, he'd arrange it while he was out of the country.
Hearing a mother read that about her own daughter in court, that must have been incredibly powerful.
Yeah. You have to imagine it adds such an emotional weight. reinforces that whole narrative of coercion and fear.
The details in that email, the sex tapes, the timing around Christmas, the physical threats, it paints a picture of intense alleged pressure.
Regina said her reaction reading it, she felt physically sick. You can see how that would hit the jury.
Absolutely. And did she also testify about money?
Yeah, she said Diddy demanded $20,000 from her, claimed it was for money he'd spent on Cassie.
And did she pay it?
She says she did. Took out a loan because she was scared for Cassie's safety. Wired the money.
But then what happened?
He returned it days later. Just gave it back.
That's odd. Demanding it under duress, then returning it. How does the prosecution spin that?
Well, they'll likely argue it was just another control tactic, right? Exerting power, causing more emotional distress, even by giving it back after she went through the fear and effort of getting it.
Makes sense. More manipulation. And we know Diddy denies everything.
Denies it all. And the prosecution's apparently getting ready for their next witnesses, including someone they're calling Victim 2.
Okay, so they're clearly trying to establish that pattern beyond just Cassie.
Seems like it. Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about the role of drugs in all this.
Yeah, that seems really central, doesn't it? The legal experts on law and crime were definitely highlighting it.
The core allegation seems to be that Diddy used drugs to control Cassie, maybe others, during these freak-offs.
Right. Why is the drug angle so important in a case technically about sex trafficking and racketeering?
Well, it feeds directly into the idea of coercion, If they can show he was providing drugs or making them easily available.
It makes it harder for the defense to argue everything was consensual.
Exactly. Cassie herself testified she was often high, given different drugs during these events. Other witnesses apparently said she often seemed impaired.
But the defense will argue she chose to take them, right? That it was part of the lifestyle she wanted access to.
Sure. But the prosecution counters with the power dynamics, the age difference when they met, plus all the alleged violence and control we've already talked about.
It paints a complex picture. We also heard from David James, another former assistant.
Right. He testified he actually picked up drugs for Diddy and his friends.
And he had that very specific anecdote.
Oh, yeah. Seeing Diddy take an ecstasy pill with former President Obama's face on it.
That's certainly memorable. Maybe not legally crucial, but definitely attention-grabbing.
Totally. But maybe more relevant legally is the stuff they reportedly found in Diddy's Miami mansion.
What did they find?
Various pills, pink, white, blue, yellow, orange, identified as MDMA, rolled up $100 bills, and something alleged to be cocaine with a label saying DBL wash.
DBL wash. Any idea what that means?
The reports we saw didn't spell it out, but usually labels like that on street drugs suggest something about purity or how it was processed. Could just be another detail for the prosecution.
So physical evidence potentially backing up the drug use claims.
Seems like it. James also claimed Diddy used Percocets daily, then switched to ecstasy and MDMA at night.
And didn't Sheree Hayes mention drugs, too?
Yeah, he said marijuana was around during the freak-offs. Said it was offered to him, but he made a joke about not inhaling, like Bill Clinton.
Huh. So multiple witnesses talking about drug use connected to Diddy.
Right, and the legal experts pointed out, while Diddy could maybe have faced drug charges separately.
The prosecution seems focused on using the drug angle to support the sex trafficking and racketeering charges.
Yeah, maybe statute of limitations issues on some drug stuff. Or maybe it's just strategically smarter to weave it into the bigger narrative.
Makes sense. It's just wild how these presidential names keep popping up, though.
I know. Obama on the ecstasy pill.
Clinton and the marijuana joke.
And Trump, because David James said Trump International was Diddy's favorite hotel in New York. And Hayes said one of the freak-offs happened there.
It adds this surreal layer, doesn't it? Underscores the high-profile world he moved in, I guess.
Definitely. Okay, let's dig into this racketeering enterprise concept, because that's key.
Yeah, the RTO charge? The legal expert on law and crime broke it down pretty well.
They need to prove more than just Diddy doing bad things individually, right? They need to show an enterprise.
Exactly. An ongoing organization, even if it's informal. A pattern of criminal activity conducted through that enterprise. He couldn't have been acting totally alone.
So what does an enterprise actually look like in this legal context? Can you simplify that?
Think of it like a network. The prosecution needs to show there was a group, maybe assistants, maybe associates, whoever working together, maybe even loosely.
Towards a common criminal goal.
Right. In this case, allegedly facilitating sex trafficking, maybe drug distribution, whatever fits the pattern, all supposedly directed by Diddy.
So it's about structure, purpose. Yeah. Something bigger than just one guy's actions.
Precisely. That's why the testimonies from people like Kaplan and James, the assistants who allegedly got drugs or arranged travel or cleaned up, that's all crucial for building that picture of a coordinated operation.
Got it. The expert also said something interesting about the prosecution needing to create a certain vibe for the jury.
Yeah, not just meeting the legal definition, but convincing the jury this is morally right.
What does that imply about their strategy? It's more than just facts and law.
It suggests they're appealing to the jury's sense of justice, Racketeering charges often imply serious, organized, ongoing crime.
Right.
They need the jury to feel that Diddy's alleged actions rise to that level, that it's not just isolated incidents, but a systemic pattern of abuse and exploitation that needs this kind of serious charge to address it properly. It's about the overall narrative resonating.
Okay. So finally, let's think about the jury themselves. How does Diddy's whole public image, his lifestyle, and just how shocking these allegations are, how does that play out?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The legal expert acknowledged how disturbing this stuff is, even for people used to legal cases.
And the defense strategy has to be, okay, jurors, you might not like his lifestyle, but you have to judge him only on these specific charges.
Absolutely. That separation is critical for the defense. But it's tough for jurors.
Yeah, how do you realistically separate those feelings when the details are so lurid?
It's incredibly challenging. We're all human. The principle is clear evidence and law only, but subconscious bias feelings about the defendant, they can creep in.
That expert mentioned jurors potentially finding solace in convicting someone they see as a bad person if the evidence is there.
Right. It's a tricky psychological area. Jurors have that dual role. Hold the guilty accountable, but don't convict the innocent just because you dislike them or their lifestyle. It's a huge responsibility.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, based on these YouTube reports,
Wow.
the picture emerging from these testimonies is deeply disturbing. Allegations of control, abuse, exploitation.
Yeah, and the role drugs allegedly played seems really significant, possibly as a tool for that control.
Plus those weird presidential name drops just sprinkled in. And understanding the legal hurdles, like proving that whole racketeering enterprise.
It's incredibly complex. And if we step back and think about what this means for you, the listener, consider that contrast, right? The shiny world of fame versus these dark, dark allegations.
Yeah. It really makes you wonder, what does this reveal about power dynamics? How easily can they be exploited, especially behind closed doors in worlds of, extreme wealth and influence?
And what questions does this raise for you about accountability? Is the justice system equipped to handle cases involving people with this level of fame and power effectively?
Definitely a lot to chew on as this trial continues to unfold.